Hello and welcome to another episode of Skin Like a Rhino, the podcast by Elvie, in which I, Tania, get to meet some incredible women breaking old taboos and new ground. In today's episode, I am delighted to welcome Ashley James, who is one of the most outspoken, effective and passionate campaigners I've ever met when it comes to talking about incredibly sensitive and taboo women's health issues. In today's episode, we'll be talking a lot about Ashley's own journey for what it was for her like to become a parent and how she has used that to become such an effective campaigner for women's issues more broadly. Welcome, Ashley. It's so good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. I know, well, we've met, I've been on your show and we talked a lot about motherhood and pelvic floor health. And I feel like actually there's a lot still to talk about within those areas, and also the work that you've been doing in the last couple of years, which is a lot around, I suppose, talking about different taboo issues that affect women and society more broadly. Is that a fair way to summarize it?
Yeah, I think so. I think having children definitely opened my eyes to kind of how many of our, especially health issues, but I mean, all issues are kind of held back because there's shame and taboo around them.
Definitely want to talk about all those issues and also widen it out beyond just becoming a mum, because it's becoming a parent is such a huge transition in life, right? And I think both you and I are fans of Lucy Jones's work with matrescence, right? And I've had her on the show talking about like just how much of a transition it is, not just psychologically, but also existentially, biologically, and so on. Do you want to just talk us through a bit, I suppose, where you were before you became a parent, how you thought becoming a parent would be like and how it was different, and then we can take it from there?
Yeah, so I was 34 in the end when I had Alfie. So I suppose by society standards, a later mum. And interestingly, I never wanted children. I kind of always imagined my life as, I suppose, being like the rich auntie as opposed to a broke mum. And I met my partner, Tommy, and then lockdown happened and everything kind of just like changed very quickly. So it was quite an interesting transition, but I think it was once I became a mum, I realised how much internalised misogyny I had around mums and motherhood in general. It was a really big transition, I think probably even more so because I was also a lockdown mum. So I did most of my pregnancy and the first 6 months of Alfie's life, completely locked down. And that was quite isolating, especially because none of my friends really had children. So I think I leaned a lot on my like online community during that period. And I think, it just opened my eyes. I think where in the past I'd kind of been like, oh, mums are so negative, that then when I became a mum, I was like, well, hang on, it's not negativity. It's just like there's a reason why people are struggling and why people are kind of like weighed down with the weight of the expectations. I feel like, life has evolved so much since the 1950s, let's say, but the expectations that we place in the different gender roles are still very outdated, and it's so subconscious we actually maybe don't even realize that we're doing it. So, I'd say that I'm lucky, if you want to say, in that I've got a partner who, like, we're very equal and who wants to do his fair share of the parenting, but I don't necessarily know if it's still equal because, he could change a nappy and everyone will applaud him, whereas I would change a nappy and everyone would tell me what I've done wrong. So, it's been a journey, but I feel like I'm kind of out the other side of that matrescence that you talked about. Like I've kind of found my identity, found my flow, and I would say throughout it, I've always felt like a really good mum, which is interesting as somebody who kind of believed that I wasn't maternal. But I've never sort of doubted my ability as a mum. I find it quite intuitive.
So you're saying that the negativity when you talk about things, because I've seen, one of the amazing things about you, Ashley, is that you talk about taboo health issues, what it's like giving birth and all the things that people don't talk about. And because obviously you've got a large following and are very well respected, people I've seen can be quite critical, right? So I've seen particularly around that negativity point, people like, oh, Ashley, you're being too negative about childbirth and so on. But I agree with you, like we're just not having these conversations. And then if we say that it's difficult, it doesn't mean we don't want to be a parent, right? It doesn't mean that we're being negative. Is that something you've had to get your head around a bit?
Yeah, do you know what? The thing I struggle with this idea, you hear it a lot of like, oh, you only hear about negative birth stories. So let's like break that down. I don't know a single person who has given birth who wants a bad story to tell. And actually, I think birth trauma stays with you for life. Like it really impacted me, like both physically but also mentally. And it also, I think, made it much more difficult both for me and Alfie. Like we still wonder like how many of like his more like tricky I don't know, he just had like a really difficult start. And so like, yes, I can acknowledge that we were very lucky, and I'm very lucky that he's here and he's healthy. But I mean, I feel like I try to like liken it a bit to like if someone buys a car and they chose to have a car and they really like that car, but then they like had an accident, you're not going to be like, oh, well, just at least like the car's okay, or like you're fine, so just be like grateful. We kind of acknowledge the trauma of it and we don't brush it off as like, oh, you're still going on about that accident, just like stop being negative. Like, oh, you only ever hear about the negative times people get in the car. And it's like I feel like the only way we can improve, like push for better maternal care, both in the run up to birth, during birth, and also postnatally, is by talking about it and by demanding better. And in my case, I think really naively, like I've run marathons, I'm super healthy. I kind of thought, well, it'll take me 6 weeks to recover. I'll get the check and then I'll be back to normal. And that wasn't the case at all, because I was stitched up incorrectly, and that still has like physical ramifications. And B, I had like a prolapse, like it's called rectocele prolapse. I wasn't even told about that. I didn't even get a physical check. I was just kind of told that if you feel fine, then you're fine. And it was only when I went to go see a private pelvic health physio that she was like, oh no, you've got rectocele, like please stop running, you're gonna like do serious damage to yourself. And like ongoing issues with piles, ongoing issues with incontinence. And why is it that other countries get free pelvic health physios, which should be kind of like a given? I feel like we're quite good at looking after people during pregnancy with midwife appointments, but there isn't really talk of like pelvic health training. And even a pelvic health physio, that's a luxury. You can get it on the NHS, but obviously you're waiting a long time. Like it shouldn't be a luxury to look after yourself. And I also think that's where a lot of like the negativity or animosity comes from, even with childcare, with pelvic health physio, with recovery, because it is seen as almost like this privilege. But I would do anything to have not had that terrible birth with Alf. Yeah. And when I did the birth debrief, they said I was coping fine, and I was denied pain relief, and I wasn't coping fine. And I remember saying to them, like, surely like pain is subjective. It's not for someone else to decide that you're fine. So why can't I have pain relief? If I say, oh, yeah, I didn't have like drugs, or I didn't have an epidural, people are like, wow, that's amazing. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's awful. I didn't want that. Yeah. It wasn't my choice.
We get cheated, right, when it comes to giving birth in the UK, I'd say a little bit, because we fill in these birth plans and all these things that we think it's going to be like. And the doctors, to your analogy with buying a car, you don't buy a car till you pass your driving test and you've looked at lots of different cars, that you're going quite well informed. And I think when it comes to giving birth, I just met so many women as well. We just trust our doctors, we trust the hospital. And yet now we know, like to your point about pain relief, right, there's a gender pain gap. Women are not being given enough pain relief, and some of it's cost related, and some of it's old stereotypes that women are hysterical, and it's all in our heads and so on. I mean, I'm still shocked that you weren't given pain relief. Like, was it just they were overworked, they didn't have time, or?
Well, this is what, do you know what? I remember thinking, I was really looking forward to doing the birth debrief. And for anyone that doesn't know, anyone can have a birth debrief. You can request it, and you can request your birth notes, and you can actually sit down with somebody who will kind of go over your birth notes with you. So I was really looking forward to doing that, because I was really like traumatized after my birth. I couldn't go for my smear test because I was absolutely terrified of entering into that hospital environment again. I felt really like this huge, I just felt let down, because also there was loads of parts to it, being told like I had to do the physical check, even though it was so painful for me. It was like agony. And they were like, if you want an epidural, we have to do this. And so that it was like pinning me down and forcing it, even though it was like the most painful thing ever. And I still didn't get the epidural. So it was almost like, it just brought up a lot of like sexual trauma, I think. And, impacted like my sex life, like everything. I had pain after, and I went to go see a gynecologist, again private, because I was like, what is this pain? I couldn't use tampons. I was like, I'd like to be intimate with my partner again. I don't want to feel like I'm broken. And he was like, oh no, there's nothing physically wrong, because I thought maybe it was like something to do with stitching and all like scar tissue build up, or I don't know. And he said no, the actual like stitching, even though they stitched me up incorrectly, so they didn't stitch the back, like they were like from vaginally, like there's nothing there. So he said it's just in your head. And I was like, well, that's fine, but how can I get it out of my head? Like, what, so I did feel a bit sort of brushed off as like, again, that hysterical. And I was like, even if it's in my head, like I don't want it in my head, and it is a physical pain, so it might be psychological. And it was only when I went to go see this amazing private health physio that she diagnosed me really quickly with, I don't know how to pronounce it, you probably know more, like vaginismus.
Oh yeah. When the muscles are too tight, right?
Yeah, so your muscles tense up. So really interestingly, she said to me, when women experience like trauma, usually sexual trauma, but obviously childbirth is a form of that, our muscles, like we hold all our stress in like our pelvic floor muscles. So it basically was like this, like really like rigid. And all she had to do was like do this internal kind of massage. It took 2 minutes. And that was healed. And it was like, how did that get missed? Obviously, with NHS, like nobody even knew about it. With a private gynecologist who's one of the best in the country telling me it's in my head, and it took her 2 minutes. It was 22 months postnatal, 2 minutes just to diagnose and treat it.
You're the only other person I've met. I've had that. It's basically trigger point therapy. It's like having a deep massage. And because when I was looking to start LV, I was like talking to all the women's health physiotherapists, and they were saying, I mean, yeah, in your example, it was obviously the birth trauma, but a lot of women, they hold stress in their pelvic floor. You know how we're always kind of tensing up, either you tense in your shoulders, and a lot of women, they're constantly tensing in their abdomen. But basically, she did an examination on me, and the same thing, like it was, I don't know what yours was like, but it was the most intense feeling when it kind of dissipated.
It's like somebody finding a knot. If you have a massage and they find the knot, and it's like that.
Yeah, it's really intense. People are, oh my God, was it sexual? Because it kind of sounds weird, right? That she's sticking her fingers up. But no, it was just so an immense relief. But to your point, like you and I are very privileged, right? We went to educate ourselves. We went to see specialists. And I think for me, because my husband's French, like the French are just so shocked in England that we don't see a gynecologist once a year. Like we don't see women's health specialists, right? And we all know on the NHS, the waiting time is so long. So yeah, I completely agree with you. Like every woman would benefit from having these kind of examinations. And to your point about sex and giving birth, I mean, the main thing I remember from like the 6-week checkup is they say, are you using contraception? That's all they seem to be worried about.
And I remember being like, well, my child is in my bed and I'm pretty sure like my stitches haven't healed. So yeah, I'm not really thinking about contraception right now. Like my boobs are leaking. I feel like that's contraception. And now, it felt like almost patronizing. I found like that checkup, and obviously they didn't physically check me. And it's like, imagine if we had a knee operation. Like you're not just left. I've had a lump removed from my boob before, and they came to my house and they were checking my stitches and my scarring. So why is it any different? When you're giving birth, and I feel like we have this like mentality here in the UK, I think because so many women obviously give birth and have given birth historically, we're like, well, everyone else gets on with it. And we expect people to be stoic. And we expect people to be like, well, just get on with it. And you're lucky, like if your child's here and they're okay, like get up and move on. And even with motherhood, it's like that kind of like, well, what did you expect it was going to be like? And, I feel like there's not a lot of like compassion. And, with my case, because they stitched me up incorrectly, I basically had like I can't remember if it was 3rd or 4th degree tear, but they only stitched like the front, and it should have been done by, I think, a doctor or a surgeon, but it was the midwife. And So I was getting, incontinence in general, but also fecal incontinence, which is like the worst thing ever, right? Because you're like, essentially you shit yourself. So I was going for a walk and then I'd need the loo and and
Yeah.
so I was so mortified. I remember at the time we lived in Battersea and I'd like, luckily, like Tommy was great about it, but it was horrific. And at first I thought, oh, this just must be part of like the postnatal recovery. And so it was only like 3 months in, and I was like, this just doesn't seem right. But then I found out I'd been stitched up incorrectly. Then I obviously was also diagnosed with this prolapse. And it's like, why aren't we checking people? And I've spoken to so many women who have since found out that they've had prolapse for years.
Yeah.
But when they went to the doctor, they were like, no, that only happens when you're older. And it's like they're having to tell people like, no, I think I do have it and it is possible because I know someone that's had it. For like, it's like, why even the vaginismus, why is it such a mystery? Why can't people just know about our bodies? And why
No, you're right. Yeah. The actual stat for newborn for postnatal is 80% for prolapse. Basically, everyone gets prolapse of some form. Hopefully, your body will re-heal. But also the fact that doctors, to your point, I think a lot of doctors just choose not to specialize in women's health or gynecological issues, right? So they're, I mean, I don't know if you followed recently the thing about, inserting coils and Mirena. I don't know if you've ever had, I've had them inserted before. I've tried going to GP and it was excruciatingly painful, right? So now I could go and make sure a gynecologist does it. But there's been a big study showing like the amount of pain that women are going through having an IUD inserted, right? So it's so important. What you're doing actually is I think what I did, how I channeled what happened was obviously through starting LV, and I think for you've used your kind of position to really talk about these issues, and it's so important. But how do people react? Like people, I'm sure you get lots of people say, "Oh, why are you talking about these things?"
Yeah, I feel like people are like, oh, do you think you're the first person that's given birth? Like, oh, it's always so negative. And it's like, but I hate this idea that women who have a bad birth experience have a negative, as if we're just moaning. And it's like imagine if you went in for an operation, like a knee operation, and then there was like damage done, or it was like traumatic, or the anaesthetic wore off, whatever it might be. Like, you wouldn't be like, oh my God, you're still banging on about your knee. It would be like, it is like this actually traumatic thing that, and I was told, so when I got pregnant again with Ada, I knew that I wouldn't have a vaginal birth again. Like, I was like, I'm absolutely not putting my faith in the hands of I was like, I'm not doing that again, absolutely not. And luckily, or unluckily maybe, but because of like the damage from the stitching, I actually wasn't allowed to give birth vaginally anyway. And my C-section was just the polar opposite experience. It was the most like positive, amazing day. Like, I always say, if I could relive one day, it would be like the day that Ada was born, because the whole thing was calm and lovely, and I got to have my birth playlist on and I could actually remember it. And Alf came in the afternoon, and like getting to witness him meeting Ada, and like even going into that second experience, not from like trauma, not from being like, what the hell was that? It made like such a difference to my like mental well-being and my like sense of purpose and strength. And with Ada, I actually went private as well, because I was just so nervous about not being given pain relief. And I find like the disparity, like, some of my friends, or most of my friends, have given birth on the NHS and had C-sections on the NHS and been told that if they want to breastfeed, they're only allowed paracetamol. But yet I was given morphine and I breastfed. So it's like, why is it like, why are women being told if they want more than paracetamol? What, you've just had major abdominal surgery and you get paracetamol, or you have the guilt of needing more and then being told that you can't breastfeed because the medication's not breastfeeding friendly. It's like we're setting women up to fail.
I know, and what you're describing actually as well, it happens, it's not just when you give birth, right? I remember all throughout pregnancy, midwives and antenatal classes, and everyone just telling me things like, oh, you must breastfeed, you must never use formula, you must do this, you must do that. And you're being told all these things as if they're sort of the truth, and you're not being given information to make your own choices, right? It's definitely a period in your life where you're kind of infantile, treated a bit like a child, as you said. And you were talking about the mental health side too, right? And it's, I mean, at least now I'd say, like, in the 10 years since I started LV, we're talking more around what's happening to us as women when we give birth. And then recently I was actually at a perinatal mental health group, and they were saying we are talking too much about physical health postnatal. We need to talk about mental health. And I kind of almost laughed to myself, because first off, it's great that we're talking about either. But also, I think they're so related to one another too. Like, we kind of separate them out. But like, when you have tears, when you can't go to the loo, when you're in pain, when you're not sleeping, when breastfeeding is painful, all these physical things, when your hormones are going crazy, it's kind of obvious, right, that you're not going to be feeling well mentally as well.
Yeah. Like I feel like this kind of like toxic idea that, bounce back culture, it's called. So I think for me, the idea of postnatal was childbirth recovery, 6 weeks, and then it's like you either decide to bounce back or don't. I didn't think about all the other side of like the physical things, like the piles and the prolapse and the incontinence, and the impact that had on my body confidence. Because it's like, and I remember doing these interviews and people were like, are you going to bounce back? And I remember being like, I don't give, like, sorry to swear, but it's like, I could not give a shit if I'm in size 16 jeans, size 10 jeans, size 20 jeans. I couldn't care less about the size of my body from an aesthetic perspective. And I appreciate that not everyone feels that way. But I was like, what I care about is like, am I going to be able to wait to go to the toilet when I need to go to the toilet? Like, that is all I care about right now. And instead I'm having to like almost like answer like, do I care if I look like I've had a baby now that I've had a baby? And I was like, I feel like it just does such an injustice to like the actual physical side of recovery that I feel like is so hidden in taboo and shame, and that people don't talk about, and therefore that they like suffer it in silence with, which is also why I made such a point to talk about, like to openly talk about the incontinence and the piles and the prolapse, because I was like, why should I be made to feel ashamed for something that was like a really normal part of recovery? Like, it's not shameful.
Hi everyone, Tania here. Just a quick favour. We'd love your feedback. If you have a moment, it would be great if you could give us a star rating. It helps others to find our podcast and means we can continue to get brilliant guests for you. Now, back to the good stuff. Well, like you're saying, like this, women like bounce back as part of this idea. I think I've heard you talk about this, like how we glamorize motherhood. And it's almost like this oversimplification and then polarization, right? So you've got, on one hand, it's glamorized, but at the same time, we kind of, like you even described, you were misogynist, right? Me too. Like, sometimes you just think parents or mums, if you just say the word mum, it also brings up negative, possibly boring connotations, all these different sort of labels. And I think it is about also how we think about women more generally, right? So it's, like you said, if your partner or a dad's sort of doing something with the baby, everybody's like, oh, well done, right? So the expectations are so gendered around parenthood. If we just start off with mums, like the sort of the misogyny versus the glamorization, is it sort of, they're very different, right? But somehow, did you feel like you had to think through
I feel
both?
like there's this, I feel like both types of mums get criticized. So let's say even online, you have like the very rose-tinted version of motherhood, like the kind of stereotypical mumfluencers who I think obviously get a really bad rap, but it's like, oh, they just glamorize motherhood. But then you have like, I'd say like someone like me, who's probably like more, I would say realistic, they would say negative. And like neither of those people can win, because in one camp, the people who are like almost like glamorizing it, let's say, they're being told that they're making other mums feel bad because everything's immaculate and the house is tidy and they're cooking from scratch and they're doing all of those like very traditional things. So they can't win because they're making it look perfect. But we can't win because we're being negative and we're just complaining. If we didn't want kids, we shouldn't have had them. And it's that kind of like thing of like, don't have kids if you can't afford them. Don't have kids if you didn't want them. Well, what did you think it was going to be like? It's hard. Yeah, of course it's hard. What did you think it was going to be like? But what I find really interesting is, for years when I'd say I didn't want children, people were like, you'll change your mind. You'll regret it. Of course you're going to have children. And I felt like I never felt that opinion was valid. And yet, and I remember when I found out I was pregnant, I sort of remember thinking, well, how bad can it be? Because everyone says it's like that's what life's about, or like you never know love unless you have kids. So I was kind of like, nah, well, how bad can it be? And it turns out it was like not really bad. Obviously, like I'm really grateful and happy now, and I love my kids. But again, it's like this idea of like maternal mental health and happiness, and like you have postnatal depression, which is really serious and should be taken really seriously. But I feel like our mental health, it's so much more than just our hormones. For me personally, like it was so much more. I wasn't really unhappy because of my hormones. I was really unhappy because it was like a total change in life and lifestyle, and nobody really gave a shit because it was like, well, what did you expect? And I was like, not this, otherwise I probably wouldn't have done it. And so then I felt this immense guilt because at night I was like, is it normal to regret motherhood? Because I was kind of sold this rose tinted dream of it. And like, I'd feel so guilty because I always loved Alf. And actually, it was like the love of Alf is probably what kept me carrying on. But it's like, I feel like we don't have space to say, actually, I really don't enjoy how my life looks now. Like, I was like, I was out every night, like 5 times a week with friends, DJing, traveling around the world. They were like the things that made me happy when I was in that single period of my life. And it might not be like everyone's version of happiness, because everybody would be like, when are you going to settle down? And I remember looking at friends being like, but you don't seem that happy, you're just like at home all the time and the kids. But then when it was all taken away from me, I was like, that was all the stuff that made me happy, and now I can't do any of it. I can't travel, and I can't go scuba diving, and I can't like see my friends all the time. And I had like this baby who would feed every hour and wake up every hour for a year. And like, you know, as everybody else stopped breastfeeding and I was like carrying on and he wouldn't take a bottle, I felt really isolated because like nobody got it, because everyone was like, well, just give him a bottle. I was like, he doesn't take one. But also like I wanted to keep breastfeeding. And it was like, but then on the other hand, like my sister couldn't breastfeed and she felt immense guilt and shame for that too. And I was like, it feels like none of us can win. Yeah. If you're a stay-at-home mum, you've given up your life and everything and you can't win. But if you're a career mum, like what was the point of having kids if you're going to pay someone else to look after them? And I was like, I just feel like there's this like unhappiness and judgment everywhere, and it's so hard, which is also why I now say to people, like, do what you want to do, because people will judge you for it anyway. So at least if you're doing what makes you happy, you're happy.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, you get judged so much. And you know, and people oversimplify, right? They go, oh yeah, when you become a parent, you'll understand selfless love. And actually that's true, right? What you're describing, exactly what I sort of felt too. Like we have a life where we are the center of our universe and everything we do is around what we want. We're number one in our lives often. I mean, obviously we have families and communities and friends and so on. The second you become a parent, yeah, for me, I also had that kind of what you're describing as existential crisis, because suddenly you're not doing anything you want to do. And I think being a parent, yeah, we oversimplify it because it does keep changing, right? My kids are a bit older now and suddenly I do have more time, but there is that period when they're tiny where you just don't have any second to yourself. And yeah, you feel that you're failing all the time.
And I also think we allow men more grace and more compassion because, you know, their lives obviously do change. But I feel like if as a society suddenly, you know, because I was always brought up as a career focused person, like, so it was like, reach the top, go to uni, get a job, like, you know, aspire for greatness. And then suddenly when I was like not able to work and it was like, well, that's motherhood. What did you think? Well, yeah, it is hard. What did you expect? But I feel like if the roles were reversed and it was suddenly dads were just like expected to stay at home, if they were going a bit stir crazy, I feel like people were like, God, yeah, that must be really hard. Like, you went from having all this like adult conversation and really important things to think about and talk about, and suddenly you're just expected to stay at home and do finger puppets and sing nursery rhymes at someone that doesn't talk back to you. Yeah, that is hard. But with women, it's like, well, that's what everyone's done from Taylor's older time, so get on with it.
Yeah, no, completely. And then the work that we do is, yeah, it's, as you're saying, it's undervalued and invisible in so many ways. But when you talk, like, because you do talk honestly about this stuff, like it's so important. Like that's the way you break taboos, right? That's how you make change. Is how you change conversations. But you know, you do get so much. I feel like you get a lot of you get a lot of criticism, right? Like, how do you deal with that criticism online? Like I was looking, you know, I think I saw some ridiculous thing earlier this year where you were getting criticized because you said you didn't want to take out, no, not that you didn't want to, but you hadn't really taken your children out by yourself. I don't know, something I thought was just so, like, you can do what you want, right? It's your life. But then I feel like you're doing this wonderful service by opening up, but at the same time, you're probably opening up to more criticism. Or how do you manage to kind of
I think because
separate the two?
I know how, I feel like the people who get it, and the people who maybe are scared to articulate or put into words the way they feel, because they feel like maybe they're on their own feeling that way. Or like perfect example of me not taking both kids out on my own. Why would I if I don't have to? Because it was impossible. Like for me personally, it was impossible. Like, how am I meant to breastfeed Ada, but Alpha's like 2 years, 2 months, but also like a very like young 2-year, 2-month child. Like, you know, Ada's much more independent than him. Alf's not like that, and he's not very like physical and active. And it's like I felt like I couldn't keep both of them safe and be able to breastfeed. And I get that lots of people don't have a choice and they do it and they get on with it. My sister, a perfect example. She's an army wife. Her husband's way lows. Like, she does it, and she has 2. And I always say, I think you're amazing because I don't know how you do it. And she's like, well, I don't know how you do what you do. And there's just love and respect there. It's not like point scoring. Whereas I think for a lot of people who have to do it, and then they hear someone like being like, oh, I'm too scared to do it, they're like, oh my God, how pathetic. But it's like, but that doesn't make me a good or bad mum. You know, like my kids aren't going to get to teenagers and be like, what? You never had us on our own when I was under 1. Do you know what I mean? It's just like all such a nothing. It doesn't matter. Like, and some people, you know, there's always this like criticism and taboo around childcare, but I would love to have my village close, but I don't. And how can we be expected to work if we don't have childcare? But no one's putting shame on men. Like, no one's putting shame on dads to be like, what, you've got childcare? Because it's almost like assumed that it's like the woman at home doing the childcare. But like, even if people don't want to work, most can't afford to be a single income like family. So it's like the expectations haven't moved on, even though society has moved on. So I think I just don't care about the criticism, because I know that my kids are like loved and well fed. And I think it makes me feel like, I think when you open up about taboos, it allows other people who feel like you and think like you to find you.
I think it's quite rare what you have able to do. Because I think, I mean, actually, even the name of this podcast, right, Skin Like a Rhino, is exactly about what you're saying, which is, those who get it, and those who don't. It's like learning how not to mind, right? In the same way, like genuinely not care. Like when I started LV, when people told me it was a bad idea and I shouldn't do that. It's like ignoring the naysayers, right? So you have very much managed to do that. Is that something you've always been like as a kid, or kind of build that resilience or that ability to have it? It's a combination of self-confidence, isn't it?
I think as I get older, I become like angry at like society and the way it kind of oppresses us. Like, why is it that like so much about women's healthcare, for example, is taboo? And why should it be taboo and shameful that I experience incontinence or piles or any of those things, when it's like, well, society wants me to have children, so why therefore can't society and healthcare also look after us once we've had children? And so yeah, I'd say it's like, yeah, I suppose confidence. I suppose like anything, the more you start to open up about things and the more you find your people. I think for so much of my teens and my 20s, I felt so much time trying to people please and trying to like make people like me because I had low self-esteem, that I realized like I was just a bit exhausted from it.
Because I've been lucky enough, right, to interview a few women who are breaking taboos, and I would also put myself in that category for women's health. One thing I've noticed is, like, for example, I'm biracial, right? I'm half Asian. My mum was Indonesian, my dad's white. And I didn't really fit into either group when I was growing up. And I was like trying to get into groups. And I've heard you talk about how you got a scholarship to boarding school and you also felt like you didn't fit into groups. And I wonder if there's something there. And I've talked to other women who like that too. Like if you kind of grow up trying to fit in to a group and then feeling that you don't, it kind of hopefully gives you some kind of sense of it's okay to go against the grain, right? To go against what, because it does take, I do think, a certain type of person. Like I think you're, what you're doing is 99% of women wouldn't do that. They wouldn't talk about incontinence or piles. And even some of the things you talk about, I don't talk about because I am actually quite private on some things too. So, but just trying to, unpack, do you think there is something there around that, like you're saying, this people pleasing? How do you go, Ashley, who's somebody who has low self-esteem, people pleasing, to somebody who is just confident to say stuff that's going to piss off the majority of people?
I think probably I definitely think there's something in the fact that if you don't feel like you fit into your environment, maybe you're more likely to seek different environments. So therefore maybe your like views of the world are a bit more open, because you're not just in that one group with kind of one mindset. So, you know, in your case, if it's biracial, in my case, it was almost like a different class thing. I traveled and lived abroad a lot because I speak French. And again, I think that speaking another language obviously opens you up to a different culture and a different, like, seeing the way different people around the world do things. So I think, yeah, you maybe become a bit more like, well, if in France they get free pelvic health after childcare, like after childbirth, why can't we? And I think for me, the thing for me was like, because I never felt like I fitted in either at home or at school, I automatically assumed that people didn't like me. And I think that's obviously like quite a sad way to be, to like, your automatic thing is like, how can I make these people like me, especially in my 20s, like assuming that everyone hated me, and I had to try so hard to hope that people might like me. And I think I just got so, my self-esteem and like my sense of self was so low that I almost couldn't live like that anymore. And that's when I started to like travel by myself and just, I don't know, I guess question a lot of like societal norms or whatever it might be. And then I think the more I then started to try and live authentically, like the easier actually it was for me to use my voice about things. And the more I started to use my voice, then obviously the more people were like let's keep it on the pars and incontinence stuff. Like the amount of people, like even close friends, who are like, oh my God, I've never told anyone this, but this has happened to me. Then you almost, it's like a really nice feeling that like people, you almost get like form much deeper connections with people, because people feel like they can come to you to talk to you about things that they might not feel comfortable to talk to other people about. And then it almost like spurs you on in a way, because you're like, I need to keep talking about this stuff, because why are so many women suffering in silence? And this isn't right. I'm going to take it to politicians. I'm going to try and like, you know, actually do something about this. And so I think that's kind of where it grows. And I guess it's like anything, it's confidence, isn't it? So the more you do something, the more confident you become with it. And now I feel like there's no stopping me, really. There's no putting the genie back in the box.
Yeah, because you know you're right. In the same way we know, yeah, you and I, we know we're right with this women's health issue, right? As in, yes, lots of people might keep telling us that it's not important or so on, but we talk to women and we really know it is. And there was something in there you were saying, so I think I've heard you talk about learning to be happy, which is quite a simple thing to say, but I genuinely think most people in life don't really think about what it is to be happy and learning. And even what you were saying earlier about giving birth and so on, we have so many, or careers, so many expectations, right? And sort of tick box in terms of all the things we need to do. So I'm just wondering, when you talk about learning to be happy, is that kind of what you're talking about now? And how did you work that out?
I think just a lot of figuring out what makes Ashley happy. Like, not what does society tell me that I should be doing by what time, like what is it that makes me happy. And I think, you know, I think it was just like being really kind to myself, getting used to being on my own, I think was a big part of that. Doing lots of reading, unpicking lots of like limited beliefs that I'd like maybe told myself or others had told me growing up. And I think, yeah, like trying to not get caught up in what you think that you should be doing. And like even now I hate like 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plans, because I'm a bit like, well, maybe what makes me happy today isn't going to make me happy in 5 or 10 years. So, you know, 5 years ago I didn't want children, and now I've got 2 of them. 5 years ago I was like single, traveling. I wanted to be like DJing was like my big priority, because it just fit in really well with my lifestyle. It took me around the world, and life was a party. Like, I don't necessarily really want just that anymore, because it's also not as fun when you have to then get up at 5 a.m. with the kids. So, you know, like I think things can change all the time, but like happiness, it's not just one like golden destination. It's like the journey. And there's this amazing book I read years ago. I remember it always really stuck with me, and it's called Who Moved My Cheese? And it's this story about 3 mice, and they're in a maze and they're eating this cheese, and someone picks up the cheese and moves it somewhere else in the maze. And like the first mice is like, it was just here. It was just here. Where's the cheese gone? Where's the cheese gone? And he basically died because rather than moving on, because it's like, well, let's move now, so go find some more food. He was like, no, it was just here. It was just here. And then the other mice go around the maze and they try and find the cheese. And like one mice comes to a dead end, and then he was like, oh, well, that's it then. I've come to the dead end. Whereas the other mice like keeps going and he keeps going backwards and then he finds the cheese. And I always think about that because I feel like, you know, you can think that you're happy, but life can throw curveballs. Some of them can be really positive ones. Like in my case, you know, having kids, like now I've got Alpha and Ada, like even though I think I would have been happy and complete child free, I like that looks different now. It's almost like sliding doors and my cheese moved. So I kind of got up and picked, you know, to keep going.
But I can empathize with the mouse that died, because often you don't realize the cheese is moving, right? So even like when I started at LV, I'd been working in more like an international NGO, United Nations women's health stuff, but public sector. And my thinking was, I'm going to start this tech business, which is completely different. But if it fails, then obviously I'll go back. I can go back, because at least it's not like DJing. I could get back into where I'd been working before. I had the right network and so on. But actually what you don't realize is once you set, exactly like you're saying, once you set off on a different path, it just suddenly you're in a different world and you just don't know. You can't plan what's next. So, but it does, I get the feeling from following you, Ashley, you're already, you know, using your platform to talk about, like, I mean, obviously on This Morning, on various TV shows, different politics and debating and going into a lot of different issues. Is this, I suppose, how do you see the next 6 months? I won't ask for years.
10 years.
Far ahead. And obviously I'd love to talk about politics, because I have, you know, would you consider becoming a politician? And I ask this because I worry that, particularly in this country, we've got a lot of people who, you know, like what you're doing, commentating, but we need to get some really great people into politics. Is that something you've considered?
Yeah, do you know, I actually get asked a lot if I'd go into politics, and like maybe I'll get so angry and determined to make change that I'll try and do it myself. But I feel like at the moment I like to be able to push whatever party it is to make positive change. And I feel like once you get stuck into a party, maybe you're a bit more, your voice is a bit more limited because you have to be like loyal to a party. And I think at the moment I can make much more impact and use my voice in a much more authentic way by not being in politics, but almost just like continuously knocking on the door. So I don't necessarily see myself. And also, like, I think, you know, the levels of misogyny, the death threats, the rape threats that female politicians experience and their families, it's like it really doesn't make it a very attractive career to be in, which is really sad, because as you said, like, we need good politicians, and how are we meant to get those when, you know, things are the way that they are? But I don't know, I feel really lucky to be doing what I'm doing, in terms of, you know, like being on This Morning, continuing to do TV. I'd love to like maybe front more documentaries where I can kind of voice a lot of like my research and hopefully push for change, whether that's against, you know, like women's health or sexism or misogyny, the pain gap, all of those things. So that's definitely like an area that I would like to keep pursuing in terms of what, like, you know, the next few months to few years might look like. But I feel really like happy having like the mix of what I do. And, you know, I've got a few campaigns that I'm doing with like the Mayor of London. And again, like, that's really great that I feel like it's great that I can use my voice on social media and no one's telling me what I can and can't say. Whereas again, if I was a politician, I think I'd have to be much more mindful of that. And I have like a really good balance, and I feel really grateful to be doing this job and being given this like voice. And I try to be like really mindful and respectful of my audience as well, because, you know, if you lose that authenticity, they're not going to believe what you say either. So I just feel like very grateful. Like, it's a great opportunity to be able to have the platform and to know that my voice can like go where it can go.
I think anybody who really does talk about some of the stuff, some of the taboos in women's health, you have to be a bit of a maverick or a bit of a contrarian, and it doesn't work. Like in the United Nations, we were launching I was trying to launch sex education curriculum without talking about sex.
Yeah.
Ashley, I'm just so impressed with everything you're doing. So many different things, plus obviously being a parent and a partner and everything. I'm really happy that we're partnering with you at LV, and I'm excited to see what you do in the future.
Thank you. And I have to say the feeling is very mutual. I think you know how much I think I exclusively used LV, especially the breast pumps, and not because I had to, but because like you just have the best products. And I have to say, like with Ada, I went back to work really quickly and I was doing Steph Pat Lunch, which, you know, Channel 4 daytime show at the time. And Ada would come up with me to Leeds every week. And it was the LV Stride that honestly made it all possible, because it's like I was pumping on the train, I was pumping while getting my hair and makeup done. It like honestly, I think what you have created is amazing. And like the pelvic trainer I used even before childbirth, although I use it much more now that I appreciate how important pelvic health is. And like to anyone, by the way, listening who has experienced incontinence, like I can't quite explain how much like pelvic health training and Pilates have changed that. And I think especially when you become mothers, there's this sort of like old wives' tale of like, don't go on trampolines. And like, it's not something that you just have to live with. And it's not something that's just like the norm or the expectation. And I think that's what lots of people don't realize. So keep doing the pelvic floor exercises, and thank you for bringing out so many awesome products.
Thank you. No, I feel like, yeah, like you were saying earlier, it's just when you know you're making products that are going to solve a problem for women, even if men and investors and so on don't necessarily think so. And then combining that with being able to talk about it. And I think that's, you know, what you've been so good at. So together we are going to change the world, aren't we, Ashley?
Yes, we are. Love that. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining, and take care.
Thank
I
you.
hope we get to talk again soon.
I know, me too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Skin Like a Rhino. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to leave us a star rating. Your feedback means the world to us and helps others discover the podcast. Until next time.